New York City, 1950. The city never really slept, not because it couldn't, but because it didn't dare to. Neon lights buzzed through the fog on 42nd Street, taxis hissed along rain-slicked pavement, and somewhere behind the walls of brownstones and hotels, power changed hands without a single shot being fired. At the center of it all sat a man who rarely raised his voice and never carried a gun. Frank Costello. He didn't look like a gangster. No flashy suits. No diamond rings. No bodyguards lining the walls. If you passed him on the street, you might mistake him for a banker or a politician, clean-cut, calm, almost boring. That was the trick. Frank Costello didn't rule the underworld with bullets. He ruled it with favors, fear, and silence. By 1950, he was the most powerful criminal in America. Frank Costello was born Francesco Castiglia in Calabria, Italy, but America shaped him. His family arrived in New York when he was a child, settling in East Harlem, a neighborhood packed tight with ambition, desperation, and opportunity. The streets taught him early lessons. Violence was common, but Frank noticed something important: the men who survived longest weren't the loudest or the cruelest. They were the ones who knew when to speak, when to listen, and, most importantly, who to know. While other kids learned how to fight, Frank learned how to negotiate. By his 20s, he was already moving in serious circles. He partnered with Charlie Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky, two men who would help reshape organized crime in America. Together, they broke old traditions and built something modern, a business-like criminal empire where profit mattered more than pride. Frank Costello was the diplomat of the group. When Prohibition ended in 1933, many gangsters lost their main source of income. Frank Costello barely slowed down. He shifted seamlessly into gambling, legal where possible, illegal where profitable. Slot machines flooded cities. Underground casinos thrived. Money flowed quietly and endlessly. But Costello's real genius wasn't gambling. It was politics. By the 1940s, he had built relationships with judges, police commissioners, mayors, and senators. He didn't threaten them. He helped them. Campaign donations appeared when needed. Problems disappeared when inconvenient. And in return, Frank Costello was left alone. They called him the Prime Minister of the Underworld. And in 1950, that title was well earned. By mid-century, Frank Costello sat at the top of the Luciano crime family, the most powerful mafia family in the country. His influence stretched far beyond New York, into Florida, Louisiana, and even California. Other mob bosses controlled neighborhoods. Costello controlled systems. If a casino opened, he knew. If a union strike ended suddenly, he'd approved it. If a politician survived a scandal, Frank had made a call. And yet, the public barely knew his name. That changed in 1951. America was changing. Television sets were entering living rooms, and for the first time, the government decided to show the public the face of organized crime. The Senate launched the Kefauver hearings, a televised investigation into the mafia. Frank Costello was summoned. Millions of Americans watched as cameras focused, not on his face, but on his hands. Costello refused to be filmed directly, so viewers saw only his fingers gripping the table, tapping nervously, betraying more than his voice ever did. When asked questions, he answered politely. Carefully. Always respectfully. "What have you done for your country, Mr. Costello?" a senator asked. Costello paused. "I paid my taxes," he replied. America laughed. The senators fumed. But behind the scenes, law enforcement realized something terrifying: this man wasn't afraid. He knew the system too well. Even under the brightest lights, Frank Costello remained untouchable, but power always attracts rivals. Vito Genovese, once an ally, had been waiting patiently. Unlike Costello, Genovese believed in fear, blood, and domination. Where Costello built bridges, Genovese burned them. In 1957, the tension finally exploded. As Costello entered the lobby of his apartment building, a gunman stepped forward and fired. The bullet grazed Costello's head. He survived. But something changed. Frank Costello understood the message. The world was becoming louder, meaner, more violent. Television, federal pressure, and ambitious young gangsters were reshaping the underworld. Costello made a decision few bosses ever did. He stepped back. Rather than start a war, Frank Costello retired. He handed control to Genovese and quietly withdrew from the spotlight. No prison sentence. No execution. No dramatic downfall. He lived comfortably, respected, and, most importantly, alive. In a world where most gangsters died young or died screaming, Frank Costello did something revolutionary. He walked away. Frank Costello died in 1973, not in a hail of bullets, but peacefully, at home. His legacy wasn't built on massacres or terror. It was built on influence. He proved that the most dangerous man in America didn't need a gun. He only needed a phone. By 1950, Frank Costello wasn't just the biggest gangster in the United States, he was the smartest. He ruled an invisible empire, shaping cities and governments while remaining unseen. And that is why, even today, historians agree. Frank Costello didn't just survive the gangster era. He mastered it.